Thank you for checking out Unlucky, a memoir. My name's Kat. Everyone has a story. This one just happens to be mine. This is where I have to decide how to start this thing. First off, this page is going to be a telling of my lived experience for the past 48 years. And I've sat down to write this memoir so many times in my life, but it was just never the right time. The hardest part was always, where do you start? I always figured starting at the beginning. But then I had to wonder, what beginning? There's been many beginnings and many ends throughout my life. So I figured I'd start a few years back and see about how I got to where I'm at right now. If you would have told me 2 years ago that I'd be where I'm at today, capable of what I'm able to do today, I would have thought you were high or drunk. There was just no way fathomable that my brain could even wrap itself around the idea of what's going on. So, a few years back, probably 7 years ago, my life took a turn, ended up getting divorced. And then a downward spiral proceeded to happen. Ultimately, with me living out of a truck. Then that truck was towed and impounded, so I ended up completely homeless. No more couches to surf. No more favors to beg. Thankfully, I met someone who hooked me up with a storage room in a basement to rent. No facilities. It was about 5.5 cinder blocks wide, 6.5 cinder blocks wide, about 19 long. And that's where I existed for a couple of years. At the time, I was out panhandling, relying on the kindness of others to support myself and my addiction. At this point, I had been an opiate IV drug addict for approximately 30 years, on and off with bouts of sobriety here and there. I did pretty well panhandling, enough to afford me that place to stay inside and to feed my habit. But like I said, I existed. It wasn't living. I found myself on a daily basis praying to a God I didn't believe in to let me die. That it'd just be easier to let me go. Why continue to suffer? Absolute hopelessness. And by that I mean that every day was always going to be exactly the same. There was no hope of ever regaining any semblance of being a member of society ever again. I had thrown it all away, and this is where I ended up. That's how I felt on a daily basis. But yet I was too scared to take my own life for fear of going to a hell I shouldn't have believed in. Through a series of events, I got sparks and glimmers of hope. I remember waking up in that basement all by myself, saying, I'm going to die alone down here. Nobody's going to remember me or any of the things I've done in my life. And if they did remember me, it would be as a worthless junkie who threw it all away. And that scared me to death. That is when I decided something needed to change. craziest part is that God let me hold on to my pride and ego just long enough for it to save my life. Because for most of my life, my pride and ego wanted me dead. My pride and ego is what kept me from asking anyone for help with my addiction, with my health, with my situation. I'd suffer in silence because of my pride and my ego. But I was allowed to hold on to this just long enough because it wasn't for my family or any noble reason that I was scared to die. It was my pride and ego. It was fear of what people would remember me as, like it even would matter. I decided something needed to change because I knew 100% I was going to die in that basement alone. With the help of some friends, I got on a bus, traveled 1,700 miles west, from right outside of Philadelphia to the city of Denver in Colorado. I knew this might just be a lateral move. Maybe I come here and maybe I die here. But at least coming this way, there was a chance that something would change. So I decided to gamble on that low percentage and get on a bus, travel 1,700 miles west. I remember getting off that bus and just kind of having a glimmer of hope. And then over the next 3 days, everything that I had planned had fallen completely apart. I got to a point where I felt like hurting myself, so I went to check myself into one of the local hospitals out here on a psych hold. In their infinite wisdom, they decided that I wasn't crazy or suicidal. They decided that I was just homeless and wanted a warm place to stay, even though I had $200 in cash, $100 on a credit card, and two $25 Visa gift cards. So they ended up throwing me out in the morning after breakfast. I was there for not even 12 hours. Luckily for me, my brother was my emergency contact. So I leave the hospital and go walking down Broadway. So I remember seeing people the night before that were definitely high, and I said, I'm going to show that doctor that I am suicidal. I'm going to take all the money I have and go buy as much drugs as I can and kill myself and end it. I remember walking down Broadway in the morning, and it was cold. It was March, and there was nobody outside. But I kept walking, and I remember thinking to myself as I walked down Broadway, and I must have walked for quite a while. I remember thinking to myself that this is the worst mistake I've ever made in my life. I should have just stayed in Pennsylvania where I was comfortable and died in comfort. Continued to walk, and my phone buzzed. I had a text message from my brother. At this point, I'm actively looking for drugs so I can take my own life. The text message comes through, and it's my brother telling me to check out a place called the Stout Street Clinic. I had no idea what this was because I'm not from here. I was here for a couple days at this point. He tells me that the hospital had texted him and said they had called him and said they threw me out. And he told me to check this place out because they might be able to help me. And this is where I had to make a decision. I looked at that message from my brother on my phone, and I looked up at the crosswalk. I was standing on the corner of Broadway and Stout, about a block and a half away from the clinic he wanted me to go to. I remember stopping and looking up at the sky and saying, all right, God, I get it. You have something else for me to do. So that day I decided to go to the Stout Street Clinic. And I went to the door, waited for about an hour or so till they opened their doors. When they opened up, I went to go inside. And the woman at the door asked me if I was a client. And of course I wasn't. I'd never been there before. And she goes, unfortunately, we're not accepting new clients right now. I guess the look on my face spoke volumes because she asked me what was going on, what was the matter. And when I explained to her what the night before and the morning and what's going through my head, she said, oh, mental health? We'll get you in immediately. And they got me hooked up with a therapist and the MAT clinic. And that's when things slowly started to change. I remember about a month later from that moment, I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and I remember telling him that I think this might have been the best decision I had ever made in my life. So all I needed was a little bit of time. If I would have taken my life, all options were gone. Everything was over. But if I just sat through it for a little bit longer, how much can change and turn around? And my hopes with this channel, telling my lived experience, maybe it touches somebody's life, maybe it helps them through a hard time. Maybe I can direct them out of the fire. Because sometimes you just have to sit for a minute and things will get better. Again, thank you for checking out my page, Unlucky Memoir. Please like, share, subscribe, follow, comment, all that stuff. And I'm going to do my best to upload more often and regularly. So with that, I appreciate y'all. Talk to you next time.